Greetings my excellent friends, today we're here to do our first lore dive into VHS. Using the unlockable movies that are available in the game and using the map as a reference, we can piece together a cohesive storyline for each of the monsters and the associated map that they come with. So for our first video we're going to look into Howl High, specifically the first film, a little bit on the second, and the Pine Bluff High School, which is the high school map. We'll quickly go over the events of the unlockable lore for the first film, which you gain through progressing through the game. I won't be reading this out word for word, I will be retelling it my own way, so I will encourage you to go and read it yourself because there's some very colourful and creative wording used there. The only reason I'm having to go over it is because to look at some of the things that are available on the map to start forming this storyline, we need knowledge of the film to place objects and people and places, etc. So before we get into the actual movie narrative, as we'll call it, just one or two quick little lore points about the school itself. So from the plaques you can read around the courtyard of the school map, you can see that Pine Bluff High School was founded by a Martin K. Chow, and logically this will be either in the 1920s or the 1930s. The school mascot, and by extension the football team's namesake, is the Panthers. I don't know about you, but I'd love that statue in my garden. Bear the school football team in mind because they're going to form a point that I need to make towards the end of the video. Okay, so let's get into the actual narrative behind the Howl High movie as presented in the rentable movies. So, picture it, March 20th, 1981. Our unnamed main character is sent to detention by Principal Leach for fighting with someone called Michael Maleficent and his friends. I picture these as being the rock snobby prep school kind. Michael Maleficent is non-present as the narrator makes point that him and his rich friends seem to get away with anything in the school. So that even as our character is working through his detention by mopping up floors, school kids start arriving for the drama department's rendition of Bram Stoker's Dracula. As our character puts away his mop for the night, the school janitor's body falls out onto the floor, dead with fang marks in his neck. Sensing more bloodshed ahead, our character darts towards the school stage. Michael Maleficent, in an undisclosed costume for the play, possibly Dracula, possibly something else, begins to bite one of the students. Our character leaps onto the stage and begins to transform into our werewolf. This sends the audience of the play fleeing in panic towards the exits. I assume that they thought that Maleficent biting into the student was part of the play, and our character wolfed out to prompt the evacuation, but this isn't explicitly stated. Additionally, this raises my first unanswered question about the lore. Was Michael Maleficent always a vampire and could walk around during the daylight, since he was around to get our character in trouble during the school day? Or was he turned into a vampire at the start of the evening? If you let me know your theories in the comments below. Anyway, back to the chaos. The only person to not start fleeing the school is the captain of the cheerleader team called Misty, who drops her pom-poms and pulls out a silver crossbow from her backpack. What? So dozens of vampires start invading the school, referred to in the text as Maleficent's crew of cretins. So I'm assuming this is the preppy friends from earlier that were mentioned. Now in no uncertain terms, our main character begins to decimate the vampires in true werewolf style. Misty meanwhile locates Mrs. Giles, the school librarian, and escorts her to our werewolf. While the initial urge of the werewolf is to rip apart the librarian just like the vampires, she produces a silver cross which subdues the beast. The librarian whispers ancient words to the werewolf which compels him to escort her to the school library. So this is my next question. While silver is traditionally a weakness used to kill werewolves, it appears in the Howl High universe can also be used to ally with werewolves. Hence Misty's silver crossbow and why she's been unharmed by the beast. Anyway, that's my read on it, but again, what are your thoughts? Let me know below. A werewolf successfully leads Mrs. Giles safely into the library and begins to hunt for Maleficent. Before he can though, he's shot in the heart by a silver gun. Who's holding the gun? Principal Leach! The principal's eyes are glowing unnaturally as he pulls the trigger, sending our werewolf tumbling to the ground. As the werewolf begins to feel weak from the silver now coursing through his veins, a wolf feels Mrs. Giles calling to him from the courtyard. There she's holding an ancient tome, chanting into the moon-filled sky. He claws his way towards the courtyard but is beaten to her by Principal Leach, who slits her throat and takes the book for his own. As the wolf crawls into the courtyard, he is able to bathe himself in the moonlight. Though Mrs. Giles can't speak, he he can hear her voice in his head as she dies. She lets him know that she managed to fulfill a prophecy which transforms our wolf into something called the Blood Silver Wolf, a massive predatory uber-wolf of sorts. Reinvigorated, the werewolf begins to charge through the school, utilising the, quote, light of dawn. That seems a little strange to me, but at the same time if you think about it, moonshine is basically just reflected light from the sun, so it kinda makes sense. Our werewolf successfully clears all the vampires from the school, but right at the end of the story, both Maleficent and the principal both escape unharmed. So that's the basic story of the standard edition of Howl High, and with that knowledge we can get into some theorising. Now at the time of recording we don't have the extended or director's cut, so there may be more to this story, so please subscribe to the channel to stay updated, and we will be releasing a lore video as and when we get this information. Another thing to note is we only have tidbits of information about the sequel Howl High 2, as that lore is omitted from the closed beta at the time of recording as well. However, from what we do have, I'm going to take a stance that the map that we play on VHS matches takes place a few days after the events of the first Howl High movie, probably just before the start of summer vacation, but the school kids were let off early due to the events of Howl High, with no one particularly keen to go back in the short term. Now there's a few things that point to this. Firstly, if you look in the principal's office you can see that Principal Leach has been replaced by a Mr. Fine. Note I didn't say Principal Fine, just Mr. We can assume that this is a substitute teacher to cover for the last few days of the school year, with a principal to be hired over the summer. We can confirm that the movie and our matches are set towards the end of the school year at least, as we've got mention of final exams on the blackboard here. As a side note, before becoming the werewolf, from this detention note on this chalkboard, we can perhaps assume that our character is either called Brandon W or Kevin O. These are the last two students who were in detention before the end of the year in the events of Howl High, and their names were just never scrubbed off the next day because there wasn't a next day of school. Also confirming the end of the year time frame is the fact that there's a job fair set up at the entrance hall to entice students into taking summer jobs. Additionally, the Dracula stage set is still up on stage, and while that could be an indicator that our matches take place before the movie's events, the permanent damage to lockers throughout the map suggests otherwise. We know that our map takes place before the events of the sequel for definite, because the Dracula set would have to be torn down for the Full Moon Fever Ball, which is the central theme of Howl High 2, which takes place after summer vacation. It's worth noting that the flyers and posters for the Full Moon Fever dance all around say, "See you next Wednesday." Now we can only theorise that the dance was delayed until after summer due to the events of Howl High 1. We can support this because the events of Howl High 2 are explicitly stated to be after summer in the movie's synopsis. So why do I think the students never came back after the events of Howl High? Well, there's a real abandoned feeling about the map, with artwork and books left laying around not taken home for the school holidays. The only hole I can poke in this theory though is the gymnasium. The gym doubles as the theatre for the Dracula production. On the night of Howl High, the gym would have been filled with seats for the production for the audience to sit in, but as we can see all the gym gear is out and about. To potentially explain this, I want to point out the pride the school has around the Panther football team and their coaches. Basically everywhere you turn on the map there's some kind of nod to them, and trophies cases all over the place, etc. It's safe to assume then that the team will have been given permission to continue training in school despite the early closure for the summer. Perhaps they had one last big game or a cup final or something they needed to train for in the short term. So there's a few little Easter eggs I've spotted while surveying the map for this video. Firstly, the dates on the tombstone in the Dracula set on the stage are the birth date of Bram Stoker and the release date of Dracula. We've got the Kilroy was here meme. Don't worry, it's not breaking the 80s theme of the game as Kilroy's been around since the 40s. We've got some more VHS video store style artwork in the AV room on the map. One here for Violators of the Missing Glass Tomb of Disaster, and one for Alien Jaws, which looks pretty gnarly. There's a really cool one for a film called Chop Chop. If the devs weren't committed to having monsters over humanoids, I would totally be thinking this is a hidden nod to the next monster, though Alien Jaws does have potential. So for this last little Easter egg, I need your help. There's a Latin motto on the placard in the central courtyard next to the Panther statue. The first line of it reads, "Always on time." Now I'm a little rusty on my Latin, haven't used it in a few centuries, and can't figure out the second line. So if any of you are brushed up on your Latin phrases, let me know what the second line is in the comments here. Now that's all the lore for now. Now again, we do have the extended and director's cuts to dissect at some point, and we've also got Howl High 3 to consider as well, but given all the evidence, I think it's pretty safe to assume about the map being set just after Howl High 1, but definitely before Howl High 2, so we technically don't need to consider Howl High 3 at this bit. But either way, we will look into the lore of those things as they appear in the game as we exit closed beta and into early access, hopefully. Again folks, if you want to hear more lore around VHS, I will be doing videos shortly for Wart and Dollmaster in the not too distant future. Again, these will be within the confines of what content we have in the closed beta, but even beyond that I will be doing regular lore videos as we get more information. And obviously you can expect these for any new monsters and new maps as they appear. Just one last thing, we are going to start streaming on Twitch fairly regularly soon, so if you could visit our Twitch page, the link's in the description. It would mean a lot if you could have a little follow there. And that's it for this video. Be excellent to each other, and I'll see you later.